The Ashes of Creation community never sleeps, and the debates never stop. Every week there is something new, and the latest hot topic is the possibility of a wipe with the upcoming November patch. I'm Flanker, and today we will go through all the arguments for and against the wipe and analyze what is actually happening on the live servers right now. The whole discussion started about a month ago when Margaret asked in the official Discord what players thought about the idea of having a fresh start realm on November 18th. At that time, the community was almost perfectly split in half, at least judging by the reactions under her message. A more recent Reddit poll from about a week ago showed a slightly different picture. The majority of respondents there said they wouldn't mind a new server being launched. To get a bit more data, I also created a thread in Discord, and this time the result was noticeably different. Only about 35% of players supported the idea of a wipe. Overall, from what I've seen, most players seem to understand two key things. First, that wipes during Phase 3 are inevitable, and second, that they are actually necessary after addressing critical bugs, fixing major issues, and adding new content. The content side of things is relatively clear. We have a general idea of what's coming on November 18, and we will know even more after the upcoming monthly livestream on October 31st. The main disagreement within the community lies elsewhere, in how much change is enough to justify a wipe. So let's take a look at the main points being discussed. Let's begin with the economy, and I don't think there are many players who would say it's in a good state, because it clearly isn't. There is quite a long list of things that affected it in a negative way. It all started with the bugged movement speed debuff when transporting crates. It did not destroy the economy, but it definitely accelerated inflation by making crates much more lucrative than they were supposed to be. Then we had random crate spawns near crafting stations and settlements after server restarts. Also, not the biggest factor in the grand scheme of things, but still something that should have never happened. Next up, the static rarity of resource nodes, which is not only a bad mechanic on its own, but one that caused some very nasty side effects. The first one was a UI bug that allowed players to determine rare spawns before even interacting with them. It was eventually fixed, though not completely, but the damage had already been done. A huge amount of high rarity resources that players were not supposed to have entered the economy. And then came the overlays, third-party tools that showed the rarity of gatherables within a certain radius. Now, if you're thinking, oh, that's not a big deal, there probably weren't that many people using it, let me stop you right there. I'm not going to go too deep into details, but based on what I've seen, which is only the tip of the iceberg, the damage was real and significant. You might not see it on the surface, but just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Anyway, we already know that static rarity will be gone soon, as it has already been tested on the BTR. But let's assume for a second there is no wipe in November and gathering finally works properly. No more camping legendary nodes, no more overlays. It's not difficult to predict what's gonna happen in that scenario. We will once again end up in a situation where those who manage to craft gear early will stay ahead, while everyone else gets stuck playing on hard difficulty mode and desperately trying to catch up. And if that wasn't enough, keep in mind that the crafting food is about to be nerfed as well, which means you will need even more high rarity resources than before to craft a decent gear. We have already seen a similar situation at the start of Phase 3, when gear drop rates were increased and then reduced, creating the same gap. Players who got lucky early were way ahead, and everyone else was left behind. People were not happy back then, and I wouldn't expect a different reaction if it happens again. So, that is the first serious reason out of many why I personally lean toward having a wipe. Moving next to the cherry on top, the crate duping. On a U server, for example, it got so bad that heroic crates from Valgadim to Mirlet are now worth 60 silver. Unlike the first crate-related incident, when the DRs were accidentally reset and we had a rollback, this issue has been left unaddressed for quite a while. And if last time Intrepid hesitated to roll back a few hours of progress because apparently they were worried about backlash, then this time a rollback is simply off the table. The amount of damage this dupe has done to the economy over time is fucking insane. Just so that you understand, right now on one well-known website you can buy 1,000 gold for less than 50 euros. It may sound funny, but gold prices on RMT websites are usually a pretty good indicator of the economy state. And I don't know what kind of mental gymnastics you need to perform to convince yourself that the servers are fine as they are, but for me this is the second major reason why I strongly believe a wipe is necessary. As far as we know, in the near future, Intrepid is planning to start its marketing campaign, and based on what's been publicly mentioned, it should begin with the release of the Harbingers patch. Since marketing implies attracting new players, it immediately raises an obvious question: where exactly are they going to play? And something tells me that starting your Ashes journey on a 3-month-old server, where the economy is wrecked, inflation is out of control, and even finding a leveling group is going to be a challenge, doesn't sound all that appealing. And trying to catch up to old players, you can probably forget about that. But let's stop for a second and listen to Steven talking about this topic.
Okay, so the question was about how do we treat wipes. So as we enter into phase 3, as we've discussed in the past, our goal obviously is not to be wiping. We are going to be introducing new content, we're going to be introducing new features obviously and stability, but we don't want to have to wipe. However, that doesn't exclude the potential that might occur. It might be something that happens. It just kind of depends on what is going on from an iteration standpoint, from a development standpoint, but our goal is not to result in an additional wipe in phase 3. And if we need to simulate new server launches, we will do that perhaps through temporary server launches, or as we expand the player base, when we move into more marketable phases of phase 3, then we will do so with additional servers.
Could a fresh start actually be a viable compromise? Well, let's start with what we already know. After the launch of every phase, there has always been a drop in player numbers. Most of those who left were people who have been following the project for a long time and knew exactly what to expect from Ashes. When it comes to new players, and I would love to be wrong, but realistically their drop-off rate would probably be faster and retention worse. And here's another thing. As I've mentioned before, Ashes of Creation is the kind of a game that depends heavily on a healthy server population for many of its systems to work as intended and for the world to feel alive. So it's really hard to imagine a good reason to split an already small player base across even more servers. Instead of having 1 or 2 healthy and populated worlds, we can easily end up with 3 or 4 struggling ones. And if you played in phase 1, you probably remember exactly what that felt like. Besides, everything that players could test on the old servers, they can just as easily test on the new ones. So I genuinely do not see how keeping the existing servers would bring any net positive effect compared to simply starting fresh. That said, I completely understand the pain of losing your character and all your progress. Trust me, I get it. I am probably in the top 1% of players when it comes to hours spent in this phase, and I'm not saying that to flex. I'm saying that because I know firsthand that it doesn't feel great. But at the same time, I also understand what a sunk cost fallacy is and how easily it can affect our opinions and decisions. Personally, if I had to choose between keeping an old dying server or moving to a new one with updates and fixes, I'd pick the new one every single time, despite all the hours, all the grind, and everything that went into it. Because at the end of the day, progress only matters if the world around you still makes sense. And yeah, this is the third reason why, in my opinion, wipe is totally justified. The last remaining archetype summoner is also expected to appear in the game with the upcoming November patch. A lot of players, both returning veterans and newcomers, will definitely want to try it on live servers. Now, adding a new archetype to an existing server is not necessarily a big deal on its own, but it could still act as a bifurcation point. What I mean by that is, if we don't have a wipe or a fresh start server in November, then it probably wouldn't make much sense to introduce one in the following months either. I've seen someone on Discord suggesting a December wipe, and I was like, so players will start leveling their summoners only to have them wiped in about a month. I am not sure that it sounds like a great idea, to be completely honest, but at the same time, being stuck on the existing servers for a few more months just because the summoner has been added doesn't sound good either. If anything, that would only drag out some of the current problems instead of giving players a real reason to come back and start fresh. In any case, time will tell, but this is the fourth reason why I think wipe would make sense. Now, aside from everything we've already talked about, there are a few subtle signs that might point toward a potential wipe or the introduction of fresh start servers. Of course, none of these are hard evidence, but in the absence of official information, they definitely increase the a priori probability of something like that happening. The first sign is the series of recent PTR sessions that focus on testing the first-time user experience, along with a few other updates to starting zones. It is always great to see those improvements, but let's be honest, they make the most sense right before new servers open, not months after. The second sign is the decision to leave the pieces of Akadira set in the game. For context, since the Akadira set is level 29, it should only be craftable once a smithy with a Grandmaster upgrade is available. In reality though, for whatever reason, it became craftable earlier than it should have been. Maps and Margaret both commented on this, explaining that they decided to leave everything as it was because crafting the set still required all the necessary materials and effort. And while that is true, it still feels a bit inconsistent. Getting rare weapons from the Carfin event, for example, also required time and effort, and yet those were removed. And if you think it didn't, yes, it actually did. There was only one such event for the entire server, contested almost 24/7. And the more people you had to bring to fight for it, the lower was your chance to actually win the role and get an item. On top of that, those weapons, while good at the time, were still just placeholders before the appearance of journeyman workstations, while Akadira is a proper endgame set. So seeing a different decision this time honestly made me wonder, what if they decided not to do anything about it because they're planning a wipe anyway? Another factor worth mentioning is the lack of immediate reaction to the crate duping incident, especially when compared to how quickly Intrepid responded to a similar issue in the past. And I'm not even talking about the actual fix here, I mean any kind of action from their side. As a preemptive measure, they could have temporarily disabled crates or vendors, just like they occasionally do with the guild storage when something goes wrong. But this time, nothing, and honestly, that's a bit strange. So at this point I'm kinda curious, do you guys see it the same way, or should I just go ahead and order myself a tinfoil hat? At the end of the day, even with all the things we've talked about, it's worth remembering that new content in the November's patch is of course great, but addressing existing issues is just as important. I don't know about you, but personally, I would consider a list of fixes and improvements like this one enough to justify a wipe or a fresh start realm. We already know that static rarity is being removed and recipes are expected to be fixed by November as well. But those are not the only problems, so the real question is how much Intrepid will be able to get done before the patch goes live. Either way, we will not have to wait much longer. Soon enough, we will find out what they have decided and what kind of world we will be stepping into next. If this video was interesting, as usual, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. I am Flanker, and I'll see you soon.